F1 teams just found the exact rule that could erase Mercedes' advantage, and it's so small, most people completely missed it. We're talking about a loophole worth up to 0.4 per lap, a hidden gain that helped Mercedes dominate the opening races, and build a lead so big, it may have already shaped the championship. But now, that same loophole has been exposed. Not banned. Not protested. Rewritten. And with that single change, Mercedes doesn't just lose speed. They lose the system their entire car was built around. Which means this isn't just about performance anymore. It's about survival. Because if that advantage disappears overnight, the fastest team on the grid could instantly become vulnerable. And here's the part that makes this even more dangerous. Mercedes already used it. They already won with it. They already built the gap. So now the real question is not what they're about to lose. It's whether what they already gained is enough to survive what's coming next. At first, it didn't look like a loophole. It looked like a normal rule. Clear. Simple. Almost boring. A limit on engine behavior, designed to keep performance under control. And that's exactly why every team treated it the same way. They followed it. They respected it. They moved on. But Mercedes didn't. Because while others saw a limit, Mercedes saw a question. A missing detail. A condition that wasn't fully defined. And in Formula One, undefined details are where everything begins. The rule specified what the engine should do. But it didn't clearly define when it should be measured. And that single gap changed everything. Because under one condition, the engine was perfectly legal. Every test passed. Every inspection cleared. Nothing suspicious. But under another condition, the one that actually matters on track, the engine behaved differently. More efficient. More aggressive. More powerful. And suddenly, the rule wasn't limiting performance anymore. It was only limiting how performance was seen. That's the difference. And it's a dangerous one. Because it means a team can appear compliant, while still extracting more than anyone else. Which is exactly what Mercedes did. They built an engine that lived in two worlds. One for inspection. One for racing. And as long as those two worlds stayed separate, they had the advantage. A consistent one. A reliable one. A hidden one. That translated directly into lap time. Race after race. Until something changed. Because once rival teams started to analyze the data more closely, they noticed a pattern. The performance spike wasn't random. It wasn't setup related. It wasn't driver dependent. It appeared under specific conditions. Always the same. Always repeatable. And that's when the realization hit. This wasn't just engineering. This was interpretation. A smarter reading of the rules. And once that idea spread across the paddock, the focus shifted instantly. No one was asking how to beat Mercedes anymore. They were asking how to stop them. Because if one team finds performance inside a gray area, the fastest way to close the gap is to remove the gray area completely. And that's exactly what they started pushing for. Not a protest. Not a penalty. A clarification. A small change in wording. A different way of measuring. Something that, on paper, looks insignificant, but in reality, destroys the entire concept. And Mercedes knew this moment could come. They understood the risk from the beginning. Because when you build your advantage on something the rules don't fully define, you're always one decision away from losing it. What they didn't expect was how quickly that decision would arrive. Because now, that same rule they mastered is about to turn against them. And the moment teams realized that, the entire situation exploded. Because this was no longer about performance. It was about the rule itself. Engineers went back to the regulations, line by line, word by word, looking for one thing. Where exactly does this break? And that's when they found it. Not a violation. Not an illegal component. A missing definition. The rule limited the engine. But it never clearly defined the conditions under which that limit had to be respected. And that changes everything. Because in Formula One, conditions are everything. Temperature, pressure, load. These aren't details. They define how the car actually performs. So if a rule ignores those conditions, it leaves a door open. And Mercedes walked straight through it. But now, that door has been found. And once it's found, it doesn't stay open for long. Because rival teams didn't just complain. They presented something much more powerful. Evidence. Data showing that the engine behaved one way during FIA checks, and another way on track. Not illegally, but differently enough to matter. And that's the key. Because the FIA doesn't need something to be illegal to act. They just need to see that the rule isn't doing what it was designed to do. And in this case, it wasn't. So instead of banning anything, they did something far more effective. They completed the rule. They defined the missing condition. They closed the gap. And with that single clarification, Mercedes' advantage didn't get reduced. It disappeared. Because the system only worked under that undefined window. Remove the window, and the system has no value. Zero. Which creates a brutal reality for Mercedes. They didn't just lose a performance gain. They lost the logic behind their engine. The way it was designed to operate. The way it delivered power. The way it managed efficiency. Everything was built around that interpretation. And now, that interpretation no longer exists. So the problem isn't just speed. It's identity. Because suddenly, the car behaves differently. The balance shifts. The power delivery changes. The drivers feel it immediately. And in Formula One, feeling something is wrong is often worse than seeing it in data. Because confidence drops first. Then performance follows. But here's where this becomes even more critical. This change didn't come at the start of the season. It came after Mercedes had already used the advantage to its full potential. They dominated early. They built a gap. They secured points that no one can take away. And that creates a situation no one is comfortable with. The advantage is gone. But the impact of it remains. Which means the championship is now split into two phases. Before the rule was completed. And after. And those two phases are completely different. Because before, Mercedes controlled everything. Now, they have to defend it. And that shift is dangerous. Because defending a lead is much harder than building one. Every race becomes a risk. Every strategy becomes a calculation. Every mistake becomes more expensive. And on the other side, every rival smells opportunity. Because they know something Mercedes is now starting to feel. The gap is no longer protected. It's exposed. And once a gap is exposed in Formula One, it gets attacked. Relentlessly. Which brings us to the real turning point of this story. Not when Mercedes found the advantage. Not when the FIA changed the rule. But right now. This exact moment. Where one team is trying to hold on. And everyone else is trying to take it away. And the outcome will not depend on who was right. It will depend on who adapts faster. And this is where the real battle begins. Not in the engine. Not in the rulebook. But in adaptation. Because once an advantage like that disappears, every team resets. But not equally. Mercedes has to rebuild. The others just have to improve. And that difference is massive. Because rebuilding means going backwards first. Understanding what was lost. Relearning how the car behaves. Finding new ways to extract performance without the system that made everything easier. And that takes time. Time they don't have. Because while Mercedes is trying to recover, their rivals are accelerating. Ferrari is no longer guessing. They have a clear target now. A Mercedes without that hidden advantage. Red Bull is no longer chasing shadows. They are matching real performance. And that changes how aggressively they approach every race. Because now, beating Mercedes feels possible. And once that belief appears, it spreads. Fast. Confidence builds. Risks increase. Execution sharpens. And suddenly, the pressure flips. Mercedes is no longer the hunter. They are the target. And every team is aiming at them. Every strategy is built around them. Every opportunity is taken against them. And that creates a level of pressure that is very different from dominance. Because when you dominate, you control the pace. But when you are under attack, you react to it. Corner by corner. Lap by lap. Decision by decision. And this is where small details start deciding everything. A slightly worse exit. A marginally slower straight. A tiny drop in efficiency. Individually, nothing dramatic. Together, enough to lose positions. Enough to lose races. Enough to lose a championship. And inside Mercedes, they know it. Because the data confirms what the drivers feel. The margin is gone. The safety cushion has disappeared. And now, every race is exposed. But here's the part that makes this even more intense. They can't go back. That advantage is not recoverable. The rule has been closed. The gap is gone. Which means the only way forward is to find something new. Something different. Another interpretation. Another edge. But that's the hardest part. Because now, every team is watching more closely than ever. Every detail is analyzed. Every gain is questioned. And the FIA is reacting faster. So the window Mercedes used before may not exist again. And that forces a completely different approach. Less risk. More caution. More conventional development. And that reduces the chance of finding a breakthrough. Which is exactly what their rivals want. Because if Mercedes becomes just another fast team, then the championship becomes open. Unpredictable. Contested. And that's where everything changes. Because now, it's no longer about one team dominating. It's about multiple teams fighting. And in that kind of fight, consistency wins. Execution wins. Adaptation wins. Not just raw performance. So the final phase of this story is not about the rule. It's about response. How Mercedes reacts. How quickly they recover. How effectively they defend what they already built. Because that early advantage is now under attack. Relentlessly. And every race from this point forward is a countdown. Not to the end of the season, but to the moment when that advantage either holds or disappears completely. And now, everything comes down to the final truth. Mercedes is no longer fighting the rules. They are fighting time. Because the advantage they built is already in the past. Locked in. Untouchable. Points scored. Win secured. A lead that once looked impossible to challenge. But Formula One doesn't reward the past. It punishes the present. And right now, the present is changing fast. Because every race without that advantage tells the same story. The gap is smaller. The control is weaker. The pressure is higher. And little by little, the championship starts to shift. Not dramatically. Not all at once. But enough to feel it. Because this is how dominance really ends. Not with one big moment, but with a series of small ones. A lost 10th. A compromised strategy. A position you would have secured before, but now you have to fight for. And those moments? They accumulate. Until one day, the lead is gone. And here's the part that makes this so brutal. Mercedes did everything right. They found the gap. They built the advantage. They executed perfectly. And still, it wasn't enough to protect them. Because in Formula One, being right is not enough. You have to be right for long enough. And that's what they lost. Time. The one thing they cannot recover. Because while they are adapting, the others are advancing. Race by race. Lap by lap. Closing in. And once they reach Mercedes, they won't just match them. They will pass them. Because momentum in this sport is unstoppable once it changes direction. And right now, that direction is shifting. But there is still one final possibility. One last scenario that changes everything. Because if Mercedes can hold on, if they can defend just enough, if they can survive this phase, then those early races, those points, that gap built under a different version of the rules, becomes decisive. Not dominant. Not overwhelming. But enough. Enough to carry them to the end. And that is the tension of this entire story. Two timelines colliding. The past, where Mercedes was untouchable. And the present, where they are vulnerable. And the championship, balanced right between them. So in the end, this was never just about a rule, or an engine, or a loophole. It was about timing. Mercedes mastered the rules before the rules were complete. They won before the system reacted. But now, they have to prove something much harder. That they can stay ahead after losing the very thing that put them there. And the final answer will only come at the last race, when we see if that early advantage was enough to survive everything that came after.